You shouldn't look at me that way. It's a sin for a girl to want her mother-in-law more than her husband. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, grabbing her silk lapels. Then let me be a sinner. The world narrowed to the space between our lips. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could see the flecks of gold in her eyes, the sheer, terrifying perfection of her skin. The heat wasn't just from the spotlights anymore, it was rushing to my cheeks. "Cut!" The spell shattered. The woman pushed me away as if I were a prop. "Get it together," the director barked from the shadows. "Jesus, Alara, you look like you're about to faint. If I wanted a virgin, I'd have hired one. Again!" Catherine Harrington stood up, smoothing her platinum hair without looking at me. "Darling, they will spit you out before the dailies are even processed." Yes, that was my mother-in-law, and we were currently starring in the most scandalous lesbian epic in the history of Prism Pictures together. They say Hollywood is the only place you can get paid to lie with your eyes wide open. But when her breath hit my skin, the lie became the only truth I had left. In Hollywood, you didn't climb the ladder. You bled on it until your blood matched the velvet curtains. I arrived with a suitcase of scripts and a jagged ambition, only to find that talent was the cheapest thing you could buy. That was why I married Jack Harrington. Jack was a nepo baby before the term existed, a man whose only merit was his DNA and a trust fund that never ran dry. But I loved the silence that followed his last name. Jack was my ticket into Prism Pictures, but his mother was the reason I never wanted to leave. I had been a devotee of Catherine Harrington. I'd spent 10 years memorizing the way she tilted her head in the midnight waltz and how she could command a room without saying a single word. She was a goddess carved from marble and cinematic light. Then came the night of the Harrington family gala, my debut as the new Mrs. Jack Harrington. When she walked in, the air left the room. My idol, my muse, my mother-in-law. I extended my hand, a desperate attempt. "I'm a huge fan, Miss Harrington. I've watched every one of your films. Jack never mentioned his mother was the woman who built this industry." She didn't take it. Instead, she tilted her head in that famous cinematic way and stepped into my space until the scent of Chanel No. 5 felt like a threat. "Jack always did have an eye for a pretty frame," she whispered against my ear. "I just hope there's a picture worth developing inside." She let her eyes trail down to the hem of my dress, a slow, clinical dismissal. Without waiting for a response, she turned and drifted back into the gala, leaving me standing there with my hand still empty in the air. To secure my place, the studio heads devised a masterpiece of scandal, a high-stakes, forbidden romance film. I was cast as the lead opposite Catherine. In 1968, a story of two women in love was a Molotov cocktail thrown at the box office. I was ecstatic. It was the role that would make me immortal. Catherine, however, treated the script like a soiled rag. This is what the industry has collapsed into? Selling cheap thrills under the guise of art? She tossed the pages onto the mahogany table. She didn't look at the director. She looked at me, her eyes cold and judgmental. "I think it's a masterpiece, Miss Harrington," I said, bright with a hunger I couldn't hide. "It's a chance to say something real. It's a chance to be a spectacle, Alara. Don't confuse the two." She stood up, her silhouette sharp against the studio window. "I'll need to speak with my manager immediately regarding the technicalities of the intimate scenes." She paused, finally letting her gaze drift over me. It was a slow, clinical sweep that took in every inch of my frame. My height, the curve of my waist, the youth still visible in my skin. "You'll need to discuss the same with your representatives." Things were, dare I say, awkward at home, too. Catherine was a total ghost, always buried in her schedule and looking right through me. Jack was off at some party every night, probably drinking until sunrise, which basically left me with that massive, lonely mansion all to myself. But every morning, after Catherine left for the set, I'd find myself standing in the foyer for a few extra minutes. I'd just close my eyes and breathe in the smell of her perfume, that expensive floral scent that lingered in the air long after she was gone. Once the filming schedule was finalized, the studio demanded we rehearse the intimate scenes in private. They framed it as finding the rhythm. Catherine shed her outer layers with a practiced indifference, revealing a champagne silk slip that framed a physique defined by decades of discipline. In the glass, her eyes snapped to mine. She caught me tracing the curve of her waist, my gaze lingering a second too long on the legend I had studied in the dark of movie theaters. A shadow of disgust flickered across her face. To her, my wonder was just the transparent hunger of a social climber. "Position," she snapped. She circled me, her eyes tracking the visible jump of the pulse in my neck. When she finally stepped into my space, she didn't reach for my waist. She used a single finger to tilt my chin up, forcing me to meet a gaze that had held audiences captive for 30 years. "You're holding your breath," she murmured. "Is this your first time?" "I've had leading roles before," I lied, my voice already betraying me. "You've ever actually wanted a woman enough to forget the camera is watching?" She didn't wait for an answer. Her hand slid from my chin to cup my jaw. Her thumb grazed my lower lip with a touch that felt like she was taking me apart piece by piece. Then she closed the distance. Catherine was a ghost of tactical perfection, but the moment our lips met, the air in my lungs turned to lead. Her lips were unexpectedly soft, tasting faintly of expensive mint and a cold, sharp elegance that made my head swim. She didn't hesitate. She took up the space between us with a practiced predatory grace, her hand sliding up to cup my jaw with just enough pressure to keep me still. My pulse spiked, a frantic amateur rhythm that burned through my skin. Every time her breath hitched against mine, it felt like a command I wasn't ready to follow. After 5 minutes of suffocating proximity, I broke away, gasping, my face a humiliating shade of crimson. I was drowning in the scent of her, lost in the friction of a moment she had clearly choreographed 1,000 times in her head. Catherine didn't look breathless. She didn't even look touched. "If this is the best you can do, maybe you should go home and practice with a pillow first." Without a backward glance, she walked out, the rhythmic click of her heels echoing my own failure. Catherine's disdain was a wall, but every wall has cracks. Beneath her icy glare, I felt a bitter envy radiating from her, a reaction to the raw, unpolished fire I brought to the professional studio lighting. She found my passion exhausting, yet I refused to recoil. I became a silent fixture in her orbit. Each morning, a cup of Earl Grey appeared on her vanity without a word. One morning, she finally cracked. "If you're trying to poison me, Alara, use something more creative than bergamot."
"I'll keep hemlock in mind for tomorrow," I shot back. "I hear it's very old Hollywood." She let out a dry, unscripted bark of a laugh. "Careful. If I die, you'll have to carry the third act alone, and your posture is far too hopeful for a tragedy." The thaw was interrupted when Jack prowled onto the set. He ignored me, his eyes scanning the new actresses. His exchange with Catherine was chillingly formal. They spoke like distant business rivals rather than mother and son. I would be too if I made an idiot like him. I quickly learned that talent was just a polite word for currency. The studio didn't make movies. It traded in pretty faces and broken promises, offering women like us as bargaining chips to men in expensive suits. Catherine had started watching over me in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. One night, her dressing room was thick with cigarette smoke and the heavy scent of her perfume. The untouchable movie star was gone. Only a weary woman remained, staring at herself in the mirror like she barely recognized the reflection. She suddenly turned and caught my wrist, her grip firm. "They don't see you the way you think they do, Alara," she said quietly, her thumb brushing once over my pulse. "Not as a star, not even as a person." She held my gaze for a long second, something raw flickering behind her eyes. "I know exactly what they see, because they've looked at me the same way for 30 years. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. The dynamic on set had shifted. Catherine never hovered, but I could always feel her presence whenever Jack or one of the producers lingered too long near my trailer. One afternoon, Jack was leaning against my door mid-sentence, flashing that signature Harrington smirk. Catherine appeared 10 feet away, slowly removing her sunglasses. "Jack, darling," her voice cutting through the air like ice. "If you're quite finished distracting my lead, she has 3 costume changes and a long monologue to prepare. Unlike you, she actually works for a living." She didn't wait for a reply. She simply walked past him, her fingers brushing my shoulder in an almost incidental touch. "Dressing room, 10 minutes, she called over her shoulder, loud enough for the crew to hear. It was always presented as an intensive workshop, but the second the heavy door clicked shut, the atmosphere changed. "You're far too generous with your smiles, Alara," she warned. That night,
The rehearsal began in a silence so heavy it was hard to breathe. She didn't reach for the script. Instead, she backed me against the vanity, her hands settling possessively on the small of my back. Jack was halfway through a story about the studio's quarterly overhead when I decided to test the ice. Under the table, I let my hand find Catherine's knee. She didn't move. She didn't even blink, but I saw her knuckles turn white as she gripped her crystal glass. The industry is changing, isn't it, Catherine? My voice as steady as I could make it. She finally looked at me, her eyes narrowed and sharp. Some things never change, Alara. Like people who don't know when to stop. She didn't pull away, though. Not until the coffee was served and the proper evening came to an end. Later, in the quiet of her dressing room, she was back to being the legend. The distance between us felt miles wide. You're being reckless. Her back to me as she unclipped a diamond earring. I'm being honest. There's a difference. She turned around then, the cold mask almost perfectly in place. You're a girl playing with a career you haven't even earned yet. If Jack noticed...
Jack was too busy listening to himself talk. I stepped into her space, blocking her path to the vanity. Admit it, you weren't thinking about the industry under that table. Catherine's jaw tightened. I was thinking about how much I wanted to fire you. Liar. I saw the flash of something in her eyes. Not anger, but a hunger she'd spent 30 years burying. She tried to push past me, but I didn't budge. I was the one doing the rehearsing now. I didn't wait for her to find another reason to dismiss me. I closed the distance, my heart hammering a rhythm I was sure she could feel. Catherine stayed frozen for a heartbeat. The professional, the mentor, the wife. Then, the wall finally gave way. She didn't push me away. She grabbed the front of my shirt, pulling me into her with a sudden, desperate strength. Tell me you're not thinking about them, I breathed, throwing her own line back at her. She didn't answer with words. She didn't have to. One night, the smell of cheap gin and expensive perfume reached me before I even saw her. I found Catherine slumped in her dressing room, the legendary mask gone. Old black and white headshots covered the vanity. In her hand was a crumpled photo of Hannah, the woman she'd never stopped mourning. She's still gone, she whispered. I knew the story. The studio hadn't just ended their relationship, they'd erased Hannah completely. You should be in bed, Catherine, I said, reaching for the bottle. I can't find her, she murmured, finally looking up. Mascara ran down her cheeks. I've spent everything, and they still took her from me. The raw pain in her voice twisted something ugly in my chest. I was right here, yet she was still bleeding for a ghost. You're obsessed, I muttered. She's not coming back. Catherine's eyes flashed. Grief twisted into drunken anger. She pushed herself up, unsteady, and backed me hard against the velvet curtains. You think you understand anything? She hissed, breath hot against my lips. You're just a child playing dress-up. Before I could answer, she grabbed my jaw and kissed me. Rough, desperate, tasting of gin and years of bitterness. This wasn't affection. It was punishment. She was using my mouth to silence the ghost of Hannah, her hands tearing at my clothes with frantic need. Catherine, I gasped, but she swallowed it. The rehearsal turned into a desperate, wordless surrender on the chaise lounge. In the dark, under the weight of her body, I let myself believe the lie. The morning light was unforgiving. When I woke up, the dressing room felt cold and smelled like stale air. Catherine was already at the vanity, her hair perfectly coiffed, her face a mask of professional indifference. The legend was back. Good, you're awake, she said, her voice clinical as she adjusted her earrings in the mirror. We're behind schedule. Don't let the makeup department see those marks on your neck. Catherine? I started, sitting up, my heart sinking. About last night? Last night was a lapse in judgment, she cut me off, her reflection meeting mine with a look of pure ice. The pressure of the production is getting to us both. It won't happen again. Catherine went back to her default setting. Untouchable.
At the Harrington house, she looked through me as if I were part of the wallpaper. The rehearsal error was buried deep, and I was back to being a ghost in the hallway. Then the letter came. Plain envelope, jagged handwriting. I recognized the name on the return address from the photo on her vanity. Hannah. I opened it in the foyer, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't a love letter. It was a price tag. Pay up, or the tabloids get the truth about the legend. I shoved it into my robe pocket. If this hit the papers, Catherine was finished. She wouldn't just lose her career, she'd lose everything. I'd handle it. I'd find a way to kill the story before it started. Looking for something, Ilara? Catherine was at the top of the stairs, her sunglasses already on. She looked like she hadn't slept, but she still managed to sound like she was giving a royal command. Just the bills, I lied, moving toward the kitchen. She was down the stairs in a heartbeat. She didn't ask. She just grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging in until I winced. The mail. Now. Catherine, it's nothing. Some obsessed fan. You're a terrible actress. She wrenched the crumpled envelope out of my pocket. She didn't even read the threat inside. She just saw the name. Her face went from pale to a terrifying, vibrant red. I snatched the letter back and ripped it all apart. You were going to hide this? You're so threatened by a woman you've never met that you'd steal my mail? Catherine hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and rage. You're so small, Ilara. So desperate to be the only thing I see that you'd let her rot? I'm trying to save your life. I don't need a child to save me. She shoved past me and slammed the study door so hard the crystal on the foyer table rattled. I stood in the silent hall, my wrist throbbing. The silence in the Harrington house lasted a month, and it was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Catherine moved through the halls like a cold wind, her face a perfect mask of indifference. But I saw the way her hand trembled when she poured her drink. She was missing me, even if she'd rather die than admit it. I later discovered the truth. Hannah is still sleeping with Jack. My husband has been seeing the only woman Catherine ever loved behind her back. It didn't matter to me. All I cared about was Catherine, but I still can't bear to look at her. I decided to play the only card I had left. I started a showmance with my co-star, Leo. A few staged photos at the Polo Lounge, a lingering touch for the cameras, classic Hollywood PR. I wanted to see if the legend still had a heart under all that ice. She didn't get angry, she got efficient. Within a week, Leo's contract was restructured. A few whispers in the right ears about his unprofessional behavior, and he was suddenly sidelined from the production. Catherine didn't just win, she removed the board. She cornered me in my trailer after the final shot of the day. The air was thick, the amber vanity lights casting long, jagged shadows. She didn't say a word as she stepped into my space, her presence a heavy, suffocating weight. You're being reckless. Her hands found my waist with a proprietary grip. I'm just following the script. Don't lie to me. She pulled me closer, her eyes dark and frantic. You don't belong to the headlines. You don't belong to him. At that moment, the wall finally fell. The trailer door swung open, the harsh studio lights spilling in. Hannah stood there, her face a map of bitter lines. She didn't look like the girl in the photo anymore. So this is the new model? Hannah's voice was a jagged blade. She turned to Catherine, her eyes welling with practiced tears. I gave up everything for you, Kat, and you let them cast me aside? You let me fall while you kept your crown? It was a masterclass in guilt. Catherine flinched. Hannah, I tried. Save it, I cut in, stepping forward. The tragedy act is a bit thin when you're spending your nights with Jack. I saw you, Hannah, in the backlot bungalow. Catherine's head snapped toward me, her face going ghostly pale. What did you say? She's been working with your son, Catherine, Hannah said, her voice turning sharp. She never came back for you. She came for the Harrington money. Catherine's expression didn't change. She didn't even raise her voice. Get out. She wasn't looking at Hannah. Her eyes were locked on me, clear, steady, and painfully raw, like she was truly seeing me for the first time. "Cat, please!" I said, "Get out." The door slammed shut. Catherine leaned back against the vanity, her shoulders finally slumping. I stepped forward without thinking and pulled her into my arms. "I was trying to protect you," I whispered against her hair. She let out a shaky breath, face buried in the crook of my neck. For a long moment, she just held me back. The chairman's office felt heavy with old power. On the wide desk lay a spread of grainy photographs, Catherine and me in her trailer. The chairman swirled his scotch without looking up. "We have a leak. Rival studios are getting fed just enough to smell blood. Hannah's been working overtime to burn the Prism Productions name to the ground." He slid a single typed sheet across the desk, a pre-written confession. "You're going to sign this. You seduced Catherine. You manipulated the situation for your own gain. Then you'll retire quietly." My stomach dropped. "You want me to be the villain?" His eyes finally met mine, cold and indifferent. "Jack gave us the photos. The other studios want a head. If you refuse, we flip the narrative. We'll say Catherine was the one orchestrating everything, using her position to lure young actresses for investors. She won't just lose her career, she'll lose everything." The silence was crushing. I could save myself and watch them destroy her, or I could become the monster they needed. The chairman tapped the gold pen once against the desk. "Sign it. Take the fall. It's the best performance of your life." The press room was a wall of blinding light. I gripped the podium until my knuckles turned white. "Just hit the marks," I told myself, even as the room started to run out of air. "I have a statement to make." The heavy oak doors burst open with a loud crack. Federal agents in blue windbreakers flooded the room before the chairman could even rise from his seat. "Prism Productions is under federal investigation for racketeering and corporate fraud," an officer announced. Chaos erupted. The chairman's face twisted into a deep, furious purple. He finally understood. The real leak hadn't come from Hannah. It had come from Catherine. He lunged toward the press table and hurled a stack of photographs into the air. "Look at your precious legend," he roared. "Caught doing the rookie in her trailer." Flashbulbs exploded across the room. My blood ran cold. But Catherine didn't flinch. She rose slowly, smoothing her skirt with elegant calm, then stepped forward as if the entire scandal was beneath her. "A bit premature for the marketing team, don't you think?" Her voice cut through the frenzy, cool and razor sharp. "Those are stills from our upcoming film." She offered the cameras a faint, dangerous smile. "The chairman seems far too eager to spoil the trailer." The reporters froze for half a second, then erupted into a frenzy of scribbling and shouting questions. The narrative flipped in an instant. As the agents dragged the screaming chairman and a ghostly pale Jack out in handcuffs, Catherine walked straight to the podium. She stopped beside me, close enough that our shoulders brushed. "The board has already voted," she whispered, her fingers lightly grazing mine. "The studio is ours now." Then she turned back to the sea of cameras, every inch the untouchable queen. "Now, if you'll excuse us," she said smoothly, "we have a movie to finish." As the new chairperson of Prism Pictures, she dismantled the Harrington legacy, replacing the corrupt, old guard system with a studio that finally prioritized women's voices. Jack became a ghost in a prison cell, while Catherine became the undisputed queen of the Academy, her Oscars serving as proof of a new Hollywood. Years later, New York sat silent under a heavy winter snow. We stood on the high-rise balcony, the city lights shimmering through the white haze. I looked at Catherine, the woman who had once been my captor and mentor. Now she was mine. The legend had finally been tamed, her sharp edges softened only for me. "It's freezing, Alara," she murmured, though she didn't move away. "Then let's go in." I kissed her then, a deep, lingering claim that felt like a victory. It was a kiss that held the weight of every lie we'd told and every battle we'd won. As we stepped back into the warmth, the heavy click of the door closing behind us was the final seal on our world. A love that remained as fierce and as beautifully dangerous as the night it began.